If I stood up and gave a talk about any other age than the age of 65, everybody looked at me like I was a kook. Like if I got up and said, okay, you're 35, here's what your life should look like right now. Here's what you should be making. This is how many kids you should have. This is where you should be in your career. And everybody go, who's this kook? But I can do that for a 65-year-old, and that's perfectly palatable. It's insane, right? Life is about purpose. What are you here for?
Welcome to the Up Your Average podcast, where Keith and Doug give no-nonsense advice to level up your life. So buckle up and listen closely to Up Your Average.
Good morning, Doug.
Hey. Hi.
Man, I don't know how to get too excited, but we bring some top quality content to our viewers, and we are bringing you the guy that wrote the book on retirement today. I don't know how much better we can do for you guys, but we get to have our friend Mitch Anthony join us and just have a thought-provoking conversation about life and what that looks like. Mitch wrote a book called The New Retirementality. It was published in 2001. I don't know how many times I've read it. I've sent out probably hundreds of these to different people, and he just keeps making it better and better. Every time I've read it, it gets better and better, and I'd highly recommend it. Mitch, thanks for taking your time to join Doug and myself today.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I was trying to remember when I was dialing in today, when I was with you and your client group. Was that like 2007?
It would have been right around there. I was a couple years into Gimbal Financial at that point. And so several of the listeners who will tune in today will remember that. That was a really great time.
Yeah.
And 5 seasons in Indiana.
I think even before that, Mitch, Jim Pinkston and Rob Malmquist and I, we did a little retreat with you in Colorado.
Gold Lake.
Say that again?
I was thinking about that this morning. That was 2005, Keith.
Okay. And I've remained friends. I can't think of his name right now, but one of the guys I met there.
Ron?
Bob Rawl is his name. I don't know if you know that name.
Bob Rawl. Wow, I haven't heard that name in a long time.
Yeah, and I've literally visited him in Florida a number of times since that retreat. So
neat.
Just a special time, yeah.
That was a special place too.
Oh, yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a good time.
So, Mitch is an author. He's an encourager to guys like you and me and gals and people in the financial services business. And it's an odd thing to be an encourager. And Mitch, I was curious, how do you get encouragement? Who encourages you today?
I like that word encourager. I haven't been called that in a while. But, when I read the New Testament, was it Barnabas was the encourager, right?
Yeah, he was.
And I've always just enjoyed, like I coach kids. I'm a shot tutor, 3 points and free throws. And I just love taking a kid when they're struggling with something and getting their mind right, getting their form right, and encouraging them and seeing them make progress. That's a wonderful thing in life. No matter what you do, whatever it is you do, if you can help somebody who doesn't do it very well, there's inspiration in that. But, my source, that was your question, right, Doug? Obviously my source, source is the Holy Spirit. Where are you going to get information outside of that matters?
Pretty quickly, too.
Yeah. Honestly, here's the irony of all this. Like, my first foray into financial services, I wrote a book called Story Selling for Financial Advisors, because one of the first problems I saw in financial services was advisors were using money speak, industry speak, and they're using this jargon and nomenclature that nobody really understood. And I thought, what a silly way to start a relationship, talking over people's head. You know, like, why don't you just say, hi, I'm smarter than you. I'm going to prove it for the next 15 minutes. And then you'll give me all your money and off we go. And I thought, this is the goofiest thing I've ever seen. And then then you look at Jesus, right? I mean, you can't outdo Jesus. First of all, he invented the brain. Okay. He invented this thing. He knows how it works. All right. And he didn't use multisyllabic words. He used analogies and metaphors. And he said, it's kind of like a seed. It's kind of like a feast. It's kind of, and I thought, okay, if he was using analogies and metaphors and parables to explain the deepest truths in the universe, why aren't we? And that's what that book was about. I literally just ripped off Jesus' text, right? His motif, his
You're
framework.
ripping off Jesus?
I'm ripping off Jesus, man, all day.
I never knew he plagiarized, Doug. Here we go.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one place where plagiarism is allowed. I mean, I give him credit.
Plagiarizing Jesus. That's the title of this podcast. Welcome to the Up Your Average podcast.
But think about this, right? He had not only invented the brain, and so like people were using logic. I know I'm off on a tangent here, but people were using logic to try to convince people to take action. Well, that's over on the left side of the brain, and logic does not lead people to action, right? What leads people to action is a feeling that this is the right thing for me. And that feeling doesn't come without clarity, without understanding what it is you're talking about. And that's why Jesus used the metaphor and the analogy, because he wanted them to understand. Here's what a metaphor is. It's using the language of the known to explain the unknown. Use the thing they get to help them understand the thing they don't get. That's all it is.
Man, the older I get, Mitch, the more I find out what I don't get.
Yeah, right.
Like right now?
But think about it, Jesus is the best example, but I can go through history. Aesop and his fables, right? Ben Franklin and his Poor Richard allegories. Like, these people move people with stories. And so why would we try to do it any other way?
Well, one of the things, like I'm just saying this, not boastfully, just saying matter of factly, that I've kind of tried to go through each of your revisions and kind of see what you're thinking on the new Retirementality. And I don't know if it was in all the editions, but in the latest one, it said something like there was a study that the top regret of dying people is they weren't themselves. Like they lived their whole life being something other people expected them to be. Mm-hmm. And I think those kind of messages Jesus was trying to present to them was just to relax, right? Just be. Don't. Mm-hmm. And the Pharisees were the ones that put on the show and tried to be something else, and they were pushing down those people that were just trying to live. And as I think about like people that are out there working and they've been told what retirement is by the financial services industry, I feel like it's been a little bit of a disservice. And yeah, I feel like you've kind of been a missionary to people via the financial services, like the advisors, to say, why don't you redefine what retirement is? Because if my son graduated this past weekend, and if he begins his first day at work thinking about retirement, I think he's missed the whole point of living.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, first and foremost, there's a lot of things about the construct of retirement that have bothered me. But first and foremost, let's deal with the most obvious. And that is thinking we can pinpoint a person's purpose on this planet to an age. Okay? You just reached a use-by date. Is that what you're trying to tell me? Right? That the milk just soured on your 65th birthday? I mean, that's retirement is an ageist construct. It's saying this is what your life should represent when you reach this age. If I stood up and gave a talk about any other age than the age of 65, everybody looked at me like I was a kook. Like if I got up and said, okay, you're 35, here's what your life should look like right now. Here's what you should be making. This is how many kids you should have. This is where you should be in your career. And everybody go, who's this kook? But I can do that for a 65-year-old, and that's perfectly palatable. It's insane, right? Life is about purpose. What are you here for? What are you here to do? And what does age have to do with it? I mean, first of all, retirement's an unbiblical concept. You know, the people that made the biggest difference in the world, a lot of them were past 80 when they got called. So let's not try to pinpoint purpose to 40 years of age. Right?
I named our only son Caleb because when Caleb, he's like 80 years old, let's go take these dudes. Like that was the kind of passion that if I were ever to have a son, I wanted him to have that kind of passion that when he's 80 years old, he's ready to go pick a fight with somebody. And that's the kind of zeal I think you should have, whether you're 30, 20, or 80, don't you think?
Yeah, right. I mean, that's first of all, it's a great name. And the story that it represents, right, is believing, hey, we might look like grasshoppers in their sight, but we can take them. Right. But I lay this at the feet of retirement policy. And I'm talking about both socially, culturally, institutionally, governmentally. Retirement policy has done such a disservice to humanity in terms of believing that their life matters, right? That suddenly I'm going to turn 60. Well, here's how I like to frame it for consumer audiences. Tell me what changed in you in the 24 hours from year 64, day 365 to year 65, day 1. There's a 24-hour period. What changed inside of you? And the answer is absolutely nothing changed. I'm still the same person. I woke up the same person. But suddenly, voila, well, pull back the curtain. It's a whole new world, right? And now you no longer do that. You do this. Makes no sense. It's just absurdism. And so at the end of the day, it's for every human being to decide and to pray and to think, how can I be useful? How can I be of service in this world? Who can I bless? How can I bless them?
We were working through the transition of leadership at Gimbal in 2006. I took the summer off so Doug could step up and establish himself as a leader. And in that process, I decided I was going to go every day to a restaurant where the retired guys hung out. And nothing that I can think of during my career has traumatized me so much because I was eavesdropping to them. And I was just thinking, if this is where I'm going, I'm not going there. I quit. I'm going to ignore retirement.
There was one guy.
There was one dude there, and to this day, I think he's 88. I have lunch with him once a month, and what I discovered on that he compounded money for 20 plus years at 25% a year.
What?
And he was sitting at that Hardee's. He's like a national treasure in our community, and nobody even knows he exists. One of the other things I found out about him is he owned, until the mid-70s, a little product called Icy Hot. He sold it and gave it all away to the Billy Graham Crusade, which just blew all that. My head just...
Wow.
So he's just a rich treasure. But I guess I got to see both sides of that summer, didn't I?
You got to see that. So.
Yeah.
Well, hey, Keith, that's a fascinating idea, actually. I think that'd be a great little sort of mini sabbatical for any financial professional to just hang around Hardee's or McDonald's and listen, because it's Groundhog Day.
Right.
It's the same conversation over and over. I remember I was none
of them are watching this.
Yeah. Well, no, but here's the deal. like I remember I was in St. Louis, down south of St. Louis, and this limo driver's driving me back to the airport. And a lot of times limo drivers are retirees they picked up an extra gig because mom said, I don't want to see you all day, And so I said, are you retired? And he goes, yeah. He said, I was retired. And he said, I had 4 buddies and we would meet every morning for breakfast at such and such a restaurant. And then we go to the same golf course and play. And he said 6-7 months in, I just looked at it. He said, and by the way, at the golf course, we're getting the same result every day, right? It was just like rinse and repeat. And he said, I finally said to these guys, he said, you know what? I haven't heard anything new in this conversation in 3 months. I'm going to go start working part-time. Yeah, I can't do the same. And he said, here, we're 9-10 months down the road. He said, every one of us, all 5 of us are working part-time somewhere.
That's remarkable.
The eavesdropping that caught my attention, Mitch, was one day I was in there and I heard that they had broke off from the big group. There were 2 guys sitting there and the one said to the other, what's your day got in store? And he said, I'm going to meet with the interior designer and talk about window treatments. And I was looking for one of those plastic knives to bring it to an end. I'm like, if that's where my life gets, I'm done, man. I can't even.
You also met a fighter pilot from World War II.
I did meet him there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Godspeed to Dale. I'm guessing Dale has crossed over now, but that was good. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're not denigrating the retirement conversation at McDonald's, but what we're saying is a lot of people, I remember doing this project for a major mutual fund, and they interviewed these people who'd been retired for a year or 2, and they were advising people who were on the cusp of retirement. And I'll never forget this one lady who said, she said, one piece of advice I got before I retired was, don't go to the dry cleaners and the post office on the same day, so you always have something to do. Okay.
We lost a friend, Dorothy, probably 5 years ago. And what was the title of the book she said about assisted livings?
Boy. Was it Treasures on the Shelf? It was something like that. I think it was Treasures on the Shelf. I cannot remember the name of it right now.
Kind of play off Elves on the Shelf or something?
Well, it was the stories on the show. So all these people in the assisted living, nobody cared what their stories were, and they had incredible stories.
Oh, yeah.
And she was just talking about how wasted this resource is sitting here. And maybe, I know you're really good at asking good questions, and maybe fostering a way to get those questions from people rather than doing the Groundhog Day thing where we can find out. Because we met Dale. Dale was a fighter pilot. Nobody from World War II. Didn't he fall out of the plane?
He did.
He fell out of the plane.
No, that was Pete.
It was Pete?
Yeah. I
Dale did something.
Crashed or something.
Yeah. And he had this incredible story. Yeah. And so it's there's just such great resources, and maybe just the idea of conversations is really the point. You were talking earlier, the idea that purpose is purpose should be like the end game, whether it's Covey or whoever, start with the end in mind. But you had a chart that you were showing about how to integrate all of that. I don't know if you can share that with us.
Yeah, I'll grab that. Well, the context for this is I kind of started this with conversations with young people, trying to figure out what am I going to do with my life. Can you see that okay?
We can, yeah.
I mean,
and if you
I kind of stretched. It's not the most beautiful. There we go. So I call this the exponential me. It's like, I remember when I was growing up, people would say, well, what are you good at? You should do what you're good at. Which, there's something to be said for that if something comes naturally to you and it's organic. But, in my case, I was really good at math. I didn't have to study it. But it bored the dickens out of me, right? Because all you had to do was memorize the formula and do it over. And no matter what level of math you were doing, it was just, and I thought, I'm not going to be a math teacher just because I'm good at math. But, there are a lot of people you meet, they were sent down a path because they were good at something. And then I got thinking, well, what is it? What's going to have more lasting value than just and I call that your circle of strength. We all have strengths. We have that test called the Strengths Finder you can do, right? And figure out what your strengths are. But then there's this circle of passion, and that's the things I do that stir me deeply. I often tell young people, I say, don't go for the thing you're good at, go for the thing that fascinates you. Because as long as you're fascinated by it, you'll have energy. You'll bring energy to it, and the subject will bring energy to you, right? And even if it's challenging to you, if that challenge has some fascination in it. So that's your circle of passion. But then at the end of the day, you're probably going to get married someday. And one of the questions she's going to ask you is, how much are you going to make? I mean, it's going to come up. It's little detail, but it's going to come up in the conversation. Are we going to live in this single wide forever, or are we planning for a double wide someday? And, so that's your circle of survival. That's the things you get paid for. Is there a way to monetize the things you're good at and the things that stir you deeply? And unfortunately, a lot of people struggle with that their whole life. And I always like to encourage people, even if they're in their 60s or 70s, it's never too late to become what you might have been. And if you've never been in that place in life where your strengths and your passions and your survival all met together in a central place, that's the nucleus of who you are. Maybe it's time to find that. But at the end of the day, there's a spiritual foundation for this too. And that is, we need to look at the needs around us, right? And ask ourselves, how can I make a difference here? And what is it that gets my attention? And what is it that moves me deeply? And what is it where I know I can bring some value and progress and I can help somebody? We need to be involved in those things, because being outside of ourselves, there's no satisfaction in being self-indulgent. I don't know if that makes sense.
So I'm 63, Mitch, and a number of my peers from my college days are testing life now. I talked to a friend from my first employer out of college, and he sold his business for millions of dollars, and he doesn't, the circle of survival, you can kind of drop that off of his situation.
Yep.
But I sense in the conversation that he was so passionate with what he was doing that he's stuck now without that circle of passion and the need for the circle of survival. So he's only got that circle of strength. And he sees that even being diminished because he doesn't sense the world finds any strength in him or value in him. So how would you speak to that?
Well, I've got friends like that. I've got a friend who just sold his business for $60 million. He's just like a little lost puppy now. Right. And by the way, I just read a statistic yesterday that 65% of people 65 and older have problem drinking issues.
Right? Is that number higher than usual, or is that where it's always been?
I think it's growing. I think it's growing. And,
okay.
And this is especially true in the realm where people are, how would you put it? I know the industry has a term for it, affluent, right?
Yeah.
And, but having the money and having purpose are two different issues. And this is where I really kind of jump into the conversation and say, if you were passionate about the thing you did, why did you quit? You quit because you got paid. You got the payday. So somebody convinced you along the way that this was about a payday. And it wasn't about a payday. The payday is just a symptom of you doing something great with passion.
Mm.
And who convinced you that it was about the payday? And what maybe he could have negotiated, or she could have negotiated a situation where, they hung around and consulted on some of these projects, or they had their, matter of fact, that's what my friend did. He went back to the company that bought him out and said, how can I help you guys grow further? And they came to an idea, right? Because he was passionate about doing that thing.
I spent some time a number of years ago pondering that verse in Ephesians that says, "Don't be drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit." And I kind of can see, I see the Spirit as a passion force that stirs your soul moment by moment and through life. And maybe that was working in that business situation. All of a sudden you let that go. And so there's that temptation for some other form of drive where you maybe have to go to alcohol or some other kind of thing if you can't find that direction anymore. That's really interesting.
Well, you have to have, here's the way I juxtapose it to people. You got to have enough money to sleep at night, but you got to have enough purpose to wake up in the morning. Right? And
That's so great.
Don't expect the money to give you what only purpose
I'm
can.
gonna have to rewatch this episode.
But
I'll send it to you, Doug.
Here's the funny thing about money, and it's not funny. Money tells lies. It makes promises that it cannot keep. Okay? And one of those promises is you're going to have security. Well, security is a spiritual state. Right? Matter of fact, the more money you have, the more expensive a security system you end up buying. Where's the security in that? Right? It's going to give you safety. It's going to give you all these things. It's going to give you peace of mind. No, it doesn't. If you're a worrier, you're going to worry just as much with 10 million as you did with 10,000.
Mitch, how do you come up with this stuff? Do you just does this happen by just hanging out in the woods in Minnesota? I mean, having time. I mean, these are great nuggets.
Well, it's just, I don't think we've really fully pulled back the curtain on money and what we expect of it. And last year, I finished an audiobook called God, Man, and Mammon. And I've literally spent the last 15 years pondering these things about money, what Jesus said about money. And you know what's interesting about it? I'd say maybe 20% of what he said about money gets preached from the pulpit. Like, you're always going to hear, "Given it shall be given unto you, good measure, pressed down, taken together and running over, shall men give unto your bosom," because we're in a fundraising mode. But there's a lot of scriptures in the Gospels where Jesus said things about money that I've never heard preached. And I've been around churches for 40 years. Never heard of it.
That last one that you mentioned kind of freaks me out a little bit. The mammon.
Yeah, here's what came to me. Like, I've had this happen 3 times in my life. It happened with the new Retirementality. Literally woke up at 3:30 in the morning and the words, "the new Retirementality," were just going across my head like in a, what do you call those? A marquee. And I wrote it down and I woke up and I said, "What does that mean?" And I just knew what it meant. It knew. And then this came to me 15, 16, 17 years ago. God, man, and mammon. I saw this triangle. God was at the top. Man was here. Mammon was here. And there was this tension. It's like the Bermuda Triangle of emotional, spiritual tension. And as long as you're on this planet, you got to deal with it. There's no place you can sequester yourself and not deal with the tension. Every day presents us with money problems and dilemmas. Every day presents us with spiritual dilemmas and things we need to work through and pray through and think through and ponder. But money, I'm sure you guys have talked about this. Why did Jesus say you can't serve God and mammon? He could have said you can't serve God and Satan. You can't serve God in the world. You can't serve God in your flesh. You can't serve God in your family. No, he said God and mammon. And it's improperly translated money in a lot of versions, right? Mammon isn't money. Mammon is the spirit that accompanies money. Okay? So for some people, it takes on the effect of anxiety. Money just causes them, and they're always worried about money. As a matter of fact, if you read that verse, you can't serve God and mammon. What's the next thing he talked about? Anxiety. Why are you worrying about your life? What you're going to wear? What you're going to eat, right? But then for other people, it takes on another face. It's called pride and arrogance. Oh, what's wrong with you? Well, if you worked harder, if you were smarter, you wouldn't be in this situation, right? And we start having a condescending attitude toward people that don't have enough. Anyway, mammon Jesus basically said, if you're not serving God, you are serving mammon. And think about when he said, I'm throwing this great feast. Think about the excuses people gave for not coming to the feast. Well, I just bought a field, man. I got to look after that field. I put my money in that field. I got to take care of that field. Well, I just bought a yoke of oxen. That's like a new combine, right? I got to look after those oxen. I just married a wife. I don't know what she's charging on my credit card. I got to watch, right? It was all money. Money is the distraction that keeps us from doing his purpose on this planet. That's mammon.
You had shared a manuscript on some of that probably about 15 or 18 years ago with me. And
yeah.
And that kind of, like, I hadn't studied that until I read that. And that kind of traumatized me. That's the problem. I've heard that idea. Pardon me?
But that's the problem I'm having with this manuscript, is it traumatizes people.
Yeah. But it
literally,
I mean, it's hard for me to even talk about money because I've spent so much time thinking about money. And when a random person sits down here at my desk and they want to talk about money, what they're talking about isn't even close to what's going through my head, what money represents. And a lot of times their version of money is what financial services has told them it is. And that's pretty shallow a lot of times.
Yeah, I think it's an important discussion. I think somebody like you two would be good at it, but I think early in the money discussions, it's important to establish what money can and can't do. Money is a utility that we skillfully manage in order to navigate. That's all it is. It's like a sail. You know, you've seen my picture of the sailboat, right? With the dollar bill on it. Right? Matter of fact, let me see if I can find that. I bet I got it here somewhere. Oh, here it is. Okay. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. Oops. Give me a second. There we go. This is to me a really important distinction, right? The world's version of money is that gerbil in the wheel. We're just chasing it. And when we get tired of chasing it, they change the denomination, make it bigger. So we keep chasing. And we're wearing ourselves out trying to get it. And then when we finally get it, we're exhausted. What is money in the from a spiritual, emotional point of view? It's a utility, like a sail, that we skillfully manage in order to navigate. That's all it is. And it's not the shore we're sailing toward. It's not the sea we sail upon. It's not even the vessel upon which we sail. It's just a utility. And I think it's important for people to understand what money can and can't do. And once we understand that, all right, let's manage your money well, because it's going to help you navigate.
Yeah, that's some good stuff. Mitch, let me redirect this. We've taken a good amount of your time, but you said something earlier to us, and I didn't jot down who said it to you, but it was something you were very grateful for. Somebody told you 7 important words. I don't know if you could take the time to re-say that whole process.
That has been the guidepost. I was 19 years old. I was at a youth convention, and a preacher named T.L. Osborne got up and he said, I'm going to tell you 7 words, and if you follow these 7 words, you'll never lack for purpose in your life. And I was like, wow, it's like a lightning rod went through me. And I grabbed my pencil, and he said, find a need and meet that need. And then he said, you're going to see things that other people don't see because God's tuned your eyes to see them. You're going to hear things that other people don't hear because God has tuned your ears to hear them. You're going to feel things that move your heart that don't move other people's heart because God has tuned your heart to feel them. Now, with that in mind, find a need and go meet that need. Well, within 2 years, I found a need in my home state. Farmers were losing their farms. And I searched around the state, and there were no counseling services. There were no crisis lines. There were nothing. And a farmer a day was killing themselves statistically, getting a foreclosure notice, stringing up a noose in their barn, and losing a farm isn't like losing a job. It's losing a multi-generational legacy. Great-great-grandpa, great-grandpa and grandma. You know what I mean? It all went down on your watch. Well, I found that need. And it caught my eyes, it caught my ears, it caught my heart. And it was amazing to me. And here's an irony of this. I started a suicide helpline in Iowa. Next thing I know, I'm sitting in the governor's office, right? And the governor's talking to me about it. Like, he's happy for what we're doing and what can we do to help? Then the next thing I knew, I get an invitation to sit in the lieutenant governor's office. And then the next thing I knew and I realized was they're turning this into a political hot potato and they're using me to do it. They weren't there to meet a need.
Right.
You see, there just aren't enough people in this world that legitimately want to meet a need.
Would you tell our listeners then, Mitch, would you say that it doesn't matter whether you're a 22-year-old college graduate or a 65-year-old who just sold your business for $60 million? Would you say that advice is pertinent to both of them? Like they can hit the restart button, whether they're either one of those?
Well, here's the question. It's a little ironic, but here's the question I put to that 65-year-old. Show me where they stamped the use by date on you. Okay. Yeah. Are you expired? Or did they just tell you to move? Right? Yeah. You're not expired. You're, maturity and experience. And by the way, I got to tell you, this epiphany came to me. I did a speaking tour in South Korea some years ago. And I was flying home. When you get exposed to different cultures in the world, you start realizing they're not all like us. And the epiphany that came to me was that we live here in North America. Well, I'm not even going to say just North America. Let's just say the United States for our example. We live in one of the few cultures in the history of this planet that does not venerate and honor maturity. Every culture, the majority of all cultures venerate and honor maturity, but not in the United States. We disparage maturity. And I lay that at the feet of retirement policy and thinking. Because it's like, okay, you cross the line, you're 62, you're 65, you're of no use. Go sit in the cheap seats with Bob Uecker. Please get off the track. We're trying to make progress here. That's the attitude.
Boy, I think we could go on quite a bit. Would you be willing to join us for another show
let's do that. It's fun.
Yeah, I really am thankful for your friendship, for your time today, and thanks for hanging out with us today, Mitch.